Plants have been a huge part of our lives and our livelihoods for millennia. They feed us, they clothe us, they house us, they heal us, they nourish us, they lift our spirits. They're inextricably woven into the fabric of our lives and our societies, which is why so many beauty brands around the world love creating plant-based formulations for skincare, hair care, makeup, deodorants, perfume, you name it. But we now also live in an age where we want evidence to back up everything we do. And as a scientist, I thoroughly approve of that approach. Just because a plant has been used for millennia doesn't mean that we should always immediately accept that it does all of the things we think it does. But equally, just because a plant doesn't have a full scientific write-up or a clinical trial behind it doesn't mean that we should instantly dismiss it either. There are about 400,000 known species of plants in the world, and about 2,000 new plant species are discovered or described every year. 2,000! And sadly, many of these newly described plants are already on the verge of extinction when they're even identified. So there's a lot we know, but there is even more that we don't know. And last week on the podcast, I interviewed Dr. Janelle Kim, who's a 9th-generation herbologist. We talked about the Eastern herbs that are important to her, the formulations she makes through her private label and custom manufacturing practice, and the way that some of those herbs work. And after talking to Janelle, I thought it'd be fun to take 3 plants commonly used in cosmetics and look at the way that they were historically described and see if the science stacks up. So join me as I attempt to marry folklore and science in this episode of Green Beauty Conversations. Hi, it's Lorraine Dallmeier, chartered environmentalist, biologist, and CEO of award-winning online organic cosmetic formulation school, Formula Botanica. I host the Green Beauty Conversations podcast, and these are my Green Beauty opinions, in which I share my takeaways from the podcast interview we released last week and set you a challenge to make the green beauty sector a better place. If you want to be the first to hear all of my latest episodes, make sure you subscribe to this podcast. So today I'm going to look at 3 different cosmetic herbs and see how their folklore stacks up against the science. I needed a book to research how people historically used plants, so I've grabbed my copy of Culpeper's Complete Herbal, a book of natural remedies for ancient ills. And Nicholas Culpeper lived in the UK in the 1650s and caused an uproar at the time as many of the practicing physicians of the day felt that he was revealing their medicinal secrets to the general public by publishing his books. However, I'm obviously aware of the fact that this podcast has thousands of listeners all over the world and that there are many other, much older texts to draw information from as well. But because I can't use all of them in this episode, I encourage you to join me by looking at the historical texts where you live. And then better yet, tell me about them because I love geeking out on this sort of stuff. Right, so with that out of the way, I'm going to jump straight in. The first plant we're going to look at is chamomile. Now, Culpeper wrote the following about chamomile. He said, "The flowers of chamomile beaten and made up into balls drive away all sorts of aches. If the part aggrieved be anointed with that oil taken from the flowers, from the crown of the head to the sole of the foot, and afterwards laid to sweat in his bed. The bathing with a decoction of chamomile takes away weariness, eases pains, to what part of the body soever they be applied." So let's be fair, that's a little vague. Culpeper's text suggests that chamomile will help reduce inflammation, and we now know that the flowers of chamomile contain between 1 and 2% volatile oils that include chemical compounds such as alpha-bisabolol and matricin, as well as chemagiline, which is a compound that arises during distillation and possesses anti-inflammatory properties. One study, which was partially double-blind and randomized, looking at the application of a chamomile cream compared to a hydrocortisone cream for eczema, found that chamomile showed a slight superiority over a cream with 0.5% of hydrocortisone for patients with medium-degree atopic eczema. Now, more research is needed, but I think it's really exciting to see a plant that we've known works well on the skin for such a long time get its moment in the scientific spotlight. So I think we can safely say here that we can match up Culpeper's vague text with what science is now finding. So let's move on to another herb that we all know for its use in cosmetics, which is rosemary. Now, what does Culpeper have to say? He says, "Take what quantity you will of the flowers and put them in a strong glass, close-stopped. Tie a fine linen cloth over the mouth and turn the mouth down into another strong glass, which being set in the sun, an oil will distill down into the lower glass, to be preserved as precious for diverse uses, both inward and outward, as a sovereign balm to heal various diseases and to take away spots, marks, and scars in the skin. I should add, Culpeper didn't do very short sentences. These were all one-sentence paragraphs. And I thought that this was fascinating because rosemary is, of course, best known for use on the hair, and Culpeper didn't mention the hair once. In fact, when I looked up hair in his book, he recommended linseed and something vague called salad oil with 2 L's for hair loss. We now know that rosemary contains a large variety of different antioxidant chemical compounds, such as rosmarinic acid, camphor, caffeic acid, ursolic acid, betulinic acid, carnosic acid, and carnosol. These are all chemicals found in rosemary. And one group of scientists conducted a double-blind trial with 2 groups of women with cellulite. And I just want to add here, before we even talk about the study, that cellulite is a made-up condition, and it's entirely normal to have cellulite. So the fact that this study even took place in the first place is utterly ridiculous. But for now, let's just focus on the plants. So in this study, one group of women was giving a botanical topical cream, which contained rosemary and 2 other herbs. And the other group was given what they called an active comparator. So basically something to compare it to. And after 8 weeks in the first group, there were significant improvements in skin hydration, firmness, and elasticity. But you know what? The real success story for rosemary so far has been its use in hair growth. Because one single blind randomized clinical trial of 100 men in Iran found that rosemary oil was just as effective as 2% minoxidil, which is a well-known hair growth drug. So rosemary has great potential in both skincare and hair care. And even though Culpeper didn't necessarily talk about rosemary for hair care, this herb was known for its hair regrowth properties as far back as the Middle Ages. In fact, we wrote a blog post on this on the Formula Botanica site a few months ago. So my final plant that I'm going to look at today is the willow tree. And if you know anything about cosmetic ingredients, then you will know where I'm going with this one. So first of all, let's look at what Nicholas Culpeper had to say about the willow tree. He said, "Water that is gathered from the willow when it flowers, the bark being slit, and a vessel fitting to receive it, is very good to clear the face and skin from spots and discolorings. The burnt ashes of the bark being mixed with vinegar takes away warts, corns, and superfluous flesh being applied to the place. The decoction of the leaves or bark in wine takes away scurf and dandruff, as he called it, by washing the place with it." So we can see where we're going with this one. Culpeper wasn't the only one writing about willow bark either, because willow bark has been mentioned in history books for thousands of years. Even in the 1st century of the Common Era, Pliny the Elder wrote that he used willow bark to treat corns and calluses of the skin. Now, nowadays, of course, we know that willow bark contains a chemical compound called salicylic acid, which is from a group known as hydroxy acids. And salicylic acid is used in many topical acne preparations and is also known to enhance the penetration of other topical ingredients. It decreases the production of sebum, which is the natural oil made by our skin. And because salicylic acid is oil-loving, or what we call lipophilic, it dissolves some of the oils between the top cellular layers of our skin, which means that we exfoliate dead skin cells. It's a chemical peeling agent, basically. So here we see, again, the history books match up with what the science now knows. So those were 3 plants through the ages, looking at how they were initially described by just one herbalist, and also how science nowadays has discovered what they do on the skin and hair. Really exciting to see, right? I mean, I think that's amazing that we can follow the path of these plants through the ages, and modern science is now starting to show what many of us already knew. So my challenge to you for this week is to look into plants that grow around you or mean something to you. Find a few old herbal texts that relate to the country you live in and see if you can find the correlation between how these plants were historically used and what science can now tell us about them. And then please do come and tell me what you find, because I'd love to hear your results. This is such a fun, geeky, witchy topic, and I hope you have lots of fun delving into the history books as well. Thank you for listening to my Green Beauty opinions. Remember to visit the Formula Botanica website at formulabotanica.com to try our free online formulation course. And if you haven't subscribed yet to the Green Beauty Conversations podcast, please make sure you do so now in your favorite podcast app. Leave me a 5-star review if you enjoy the conversations I host, and I'll be back soon with my next episode.